Good evening. Thank you for attending the Southeast Tennessee Town Hall hosted by the Tennessee Department of Education. The purpose of this evening's event is to give communities an opportunity to provide feedback and comment on Tennessee's school letter grades and accountability system. Hamilton County Schools is proud to partner with the Tennessee Department of Education to provide a space for this evening's event. Prior to the meeting beginning, just a few housekeeping rules. Outside this door are restrooms. You pass them on your way in, and then if you have a cell phone, if you'll just please put it on silent. At this time, I would like to introduce our Chief of Staff for the Tennessee Department of Education, Chelsea Crawford.
Thank y'all very much. Very excited to be with you here tonight. As I was just introduced, my name is Chelsea Crawford. Before we get started with the majority of programming, we actually have a translator here for anyone who needs some assistance with Spanish translations. I'm going to invite him to the microphone just to acknowledge his presence in the room, and then we'll get started.
Okay, Spanish, I guess. Muy buenas tardes. Si alguien necesita un intérprete en español, por favor que si se pueden acercar a la mesa aquí de frente y yo les voy a interpretar.
Thanks very much, and thank you all for being here this afternoon. Spending a little bit of time with us. Very excited to be here in Chattanooga. The Department of Education has been kind of on a tour all around the state. This is officially our 6th stop of 10. And we're here to talk about a really important topic, which is a piece of legislation we will finally be implementing this year that is going to create a letter grade system for schools. And when I say letter grade, I mean letter grade like you see on a report card, A, B, C, D, F. Really excited to hear your input as far as that particular calculation goes. We're going to talk just for a few minutes about what it is we're here to hear from you about, just so that everybody has kind of a baseline understanding. And then at that point, we are going to go into true town hall type comments where we hear from you. I will take a moment to point out you've got a QR code on the screen. There are QR codes on the flyers on your table, and we're at the registration table when you checked in. That is a way where you can go ahead and sign up and let us know you would like to say something this evening. Alternatively, you can just kind of raise your hand and let us know, yep, I want to chime in, I've got something to say. We will bring a microphone to you. Everyone will have just a few minutes to provide their comment. You can provide as many comments as you would like. We will be here through 7 p.m. But what I'm going to do is every time the public comment starts, I will set a timer on my phone up here so that we can all hear it. And like I said, you'll have a few minutes to provide your remarks. I'm going to step away from the podium when it is your time to begin, and when your timer is ticking down, you've got about 30 seconds or so left. I'm going to step back up to the podium, and that's my visual cue that your turn's just about over and it's about time for the next person to start. But again, you can provide as many comments tonight as you would like. We really want to hear your input. So with that, we will go ahead and get started and just providing some information on what it is we are here to discuss this evening. As I mentioned, the department is tasked with implementing legislation passed by the Tennessee General Assembly. One of the pieces of legislation that we are implementing for the first time this year is that letter grade system for schools. It's a rating system of A, B, C, D, or F for schools in Tennessee. Of course, when we think about what our goal is at the department, what we know our goal for districts, schools, teachers all across the state, they really want to provide all kids with a high quality education that will give them everything they need to be successful after they graduate, whether they're going on to college or to a career, the military, some other pathway. We want to make sure that we are giving them all of the tools and skills that they need prior to high school graduation so that they can be successful. I mentioned that we are going around the state to hear input on how the department goes about implementing this legislation. If you are familiar with how the department releases data on a regular basis, every year we put out the state report card. It is a website where it includes lots of information about student demographics in districts and schools. It talks about teachers. It talks about dollars associated with those schools or districts. It also includes data about student achievement and accountability. Later this fall, with the release of the state report card, for the first time, Tennesseans will see a particular school and all of that information about that school, as well as the letter grade, A, B, C, D, or F. And so as we move forward to implement that legislation, we really want to hear about the things that should be represented by an A. What do we think that A or B or C should encompass? What assumptions do we believe that parents or taxpayers might make when they see a particular letter grade? How do we prioritize some of the priorities within that calculation? And so we're going to get into that in just a moment. I do want to touch for a brief second on the timeline for this legislation. I mentioned this was passed by the Tennessee General Assembly. It was actually passed a number of years ago. And between then and now, there have been some delays in the implementation of this legislation. And that's because some of the data that would go into this type of rating system has been off limits. When we think back, right after this legislation was passed, it was intended to go into effect this 2017-2018 school year. There were some issues with the testing administration. We think about Tennessee Ready and some of the challenges that we saw across the state in terms of online assessments. That essentially meant that data was off limits. You fast forward on the timeline, we had COVID-19 pandemic. Similarly, during that time, there was data that was off limits for use in a state accountability system or in a letter grade system like this. This year, we do not have those kind of limitations or delays impacting our agency's ability to implement this piece of legislation that was passed a number of years ago. So I just wanted to kind of give you a sense of how this work has progressed over time. There have been conversations about this topic in the past, and as we are moving forward and have had a number of years kind of between passage of the legislation and now implementation later this fall, we're really excited to hear public feedback and input on what the priorities and what those preferences are. So to give us a little bit of information about the kinds of things we would love to hear about, I put up a slide with some examples or samples of the types of data or metrics that have been considered, have gone into various accountability calculations in our state. This list that you see on this slide is not comprehensive, it's not exhaustive. It is simply meant to kind of spur your thinking about some of the things that could or should be included based on your opinion and preference in the calculation for a letter grade system moving forward. You see up here on the left-hand side, there are a couple of pieces I want to point out in particular. There is an icon with a star. It talks about achievement. Right below that, there is an icon with a chart, and it says growth. When we look at the legislation and the letter of the law that was passed those few years ago, we know it requires inclusion of achievement and inclusion of growth in the calculation. It also requires other indicators, other metrics, other things that we would want to put forward in a calculation or a rating system like an A through F letter grade. When we think about achievement, we think about Tennessee academic standards, those rigorous standards that our Tennessee teachers and others come together to set. What that really is intended to convey is what our children should know at a particular grade level in a particular subject. What do we believe is proficient versus not? And how do we actually play that out in our standards? That achievement metric is really tied very closely to those mastery of academic standards. When we think about growth, it's a little bit different. It actually represents improvement. So whether or not a child is achieving academically, proficient academically, they can demonstrate growth. Similarly, our schools can demonstrate growth. So of the things that you see on the slide up here, those are the two components that we know the legislation requires us to include. Everything else is up for debate. And in fact, those two components, how they are included is also something we are interested in hearing input on. I'm going to talk about a couple other examples to spur more thinking. You see chronic absenteeism represented by time out of school. We know that when children are not in a classroom with a teacher, they are not accessing as much wonderful instruction as they could have if they were in the classroom. So that is one example of the types of indicators or types of metrics that could have been included in this particular calculation, and is something that still could be included in this calculation. The English language proficiency is another example. That's another metric we think about and have talked about in this conversation in years past. We think about students who are just now learning English. They have yet to master the English language, and so they are not yet accessing all of the content area in the English language as we hope they will one day. That is one of those components of the accountability system that we think about, that we talk about. Should that be included or represented in an A through F system? We're looking for input on. There are also lots of other examples that could apply, and I'll call your attention to kind of the things that separate or could separate elementary schools versus middle schools versus high schools. You'll see up here on this slide 2 examples of a high school readiness type indicator. You're going to see graduation rate on this slide, and of course we have a goal that all of our children are able to graduate with that high school diploma in 12th grade, and as I mentioned, be armed and kind of prepared with the tools and skills and knowledge that they need to be successful after graduation. Ready graduate indicator is another that you'll see up here, and what that is intended to measure is actually kind of readiness to be successful in that next pathway. It's really a measurement of kind of advanced coursework, early post-secondary opportunities, ACT scores that are rolled up into a metric we call in Tennessee Ready Graduate. Those are some examples of things that in our current accountability system we have said matter in Tennessee. We're interested in hearing, are these types of things something that we would include in an A through F system, something different? How would we, in the same way that we have previously thought about readiness indicators or metrics related to high school space, kind of replicate or consider other metrics at the middle school or elementary school space? So as I said, these are examples, these are samples, certainly not comprehensive or exhaustive. Along the way of this town hall tour, we have heard a lot of really interesting ideas and certainly things that are not on this slide. So I want to call that out and make sure to encourage you to kind of speak up if you've got an idea or a preference about what you would like to see represented in the letter grade system. So at this point in time, we're going to move to public comment. As I mentioned, everybody's going to have a few minutes to say their piece, and I'll call names and we'll bring a microphone over to you just so that everyone can hear your comment. I also want to make sure to point out there's a few different prompts up here just to kind of spur your thinking as it relates to the letter grade system and the types of input that we're seeking. When we think about, again, that letter grade attached to a particular school on the state report card, and we see ABC Elementary or ABC High School and a letter grade assigned to that, what would we like for that letter grade to represent? What are the priorities that we have when it comes to measuring academic success in a rating system like this? What are the types of things that we believe could or should be included or considered? How do we prioritize amongst those things? So if we hear, we want this particular piece of information included in this calculation and, 3 or 4 others, how do we prioritize amongst those? Do we prioritize amongst those? Those are some of the questions that we've put up here just to prompt our thinking this evening. But at this point in time, I'll go ahead and start our public comment section. As I mentioned, I've got my little timer, so I'm going to pull that up here, but really encourage anyone who would like to contribute to just feel free to chime in. If there is someone who would like to get us started this evening, I'll look for you to put up your hand. We'll bring the microphone over to you. And I know there's some folks that came ready to speak tonight. Anyone want to go first? Yes, sir. We'll bring you a microphone.
I don't really need one unless you want to have one.
Please, and if you would say your name.
Sure.
That's great. Go ahead and get started.
My name is David Kelman, and something I am curious about when we're talking about meeting priorities and measuring the different data is, I know if you think down at the school level and the teacher level, that there's when we think about the way that we judge effectiveness there's a certain portion of that is the teacher sets a particular goal or the school sets a particular goal for a measure that they believe is good for them to strive towards. And I'm curious when it comes to, okay, there we go. I'm curious when it comes to the new system, will that still be a part of it? And also, will there be anything maybe at the district level where they can decide, we know our district well, and we know this is something that we want to set as a goal, as a measure of improvement that maybe factors into then what the schools are doing? Is there that sort of measure selection as part of the overall process?
Yes, sir. Good question. Thank you for asking it, and I'll answer it in two ways. So there are a couple of different, well, there are a few different ways actually that school districts or schools could go about setting a goal for themselves, kind of sharing that information with their community, measuring progress against that goal, including some formalized ways when we think especially about the district planning process, that LEA planning cycle that we go through regularly. I'll give you another example. Kind of at the local level, there's lots of conversation between school boards, county commissions, and the local districts. So I think the short answer is yes, sir, that is definitely possible and is happening, I think, at all the levels that you've mentioned in a variety of ways now. Whether that could be included in this calculation, I think, is something that we have not heard much about yet, but it's definitely an interesting point that you raised on whether that could be or should be considered. Could a school actually set a goal for itself that then actually plays through and carries some weight in the calculation of the formula? Did you have anything else you wanted to share there? Very good. Thank you for your comment this afternoon. Thanks for going first. Others who want to chime in? Yes, ma'am, I see you. If you wouldn't mind.
You knew I couldn't.
Don't hold
not.
back. That's right. If you would please state
my
your
name
name.
is Shannon Moody. I think one of the things that I really like about the accountability system that we haven't yet gotten to experience is that any school could earn an A. And I think that's a really important piece that I want to carry over into our new grading system. Otherwise, I think we're grading schools based on the demographics of who are in the schools, and we're not really telling parents about what is happening in the school. So that's, I think, a critical piece. I do have a question attached to that, though. I'm curious about these listening sessions and wondering, like, what do we think is wrong with the current system and why we're not looking at just implementing that for this coming year?
Thank you for that question. Thank you for your comment as well. I think I mentioned and actually answered this question in a different town hall, so thank you for bringing it up. When we think about some of the data and some of the intentions, I think, of the accountability system versus a rating system that A through F is intended to fulfill. The A through F system is really intended to provide parents and taxpayers, as I mentioned, some meaningful rating system. And when we think about kind of scales on any indicator, we think about a top of a scale and a bottom of a scale and all of the rungs kind of on the scale in between. I think our belief is that a letter grade system should present some differentiation versus having a particular letter grade system actually represent all of the rungs on any particular scale. Yeah. So when we think about a rating system, should any particular letter grade represent all of the notches on a scale, the top of the scale, the bottom of the scale, and all of the different layers in between? Does that help? Okay. Yeah, absolutely. In the meantime, other comment? Folks who want to chime in tonight and tell us a little bit about what you think should be represented in this calculation? Yes, sir, we see you. If you wouldn't mind, please state your name. Go ahead and get started when you're ready.
Sure, it's Michael Cars, and it's kind of a follow-up to Shannon that I just hope that when the elements are included in the accountability system for the grading, that you know, a lot of those metrics are directly, you know, they correlate with poverty. And so I would always want to see this system allow, I want to see this system not just be a judge of the poverty level of a school or a system, and instead actually reflect, you know, the work that's being done in those schools and systems. And so I think the more heavily loaded you put things in there that are highly correlated to like achievement, direct achievement rate. Yeah, okay, success rate is, the more you stack those in there, the weighted against a poverty-stricken school or a low-income school. So I would just want to make sure that we don't put too many things in there that have those high correlations.
Thank you so much, Mr. Carr, for your comment. And that's consistent with what we've heard at a couple other town halls, and it was referred to kind of as controllable ones. The good discussion I think we had on that was related to chronic absenteeism in particular, and kind of the notion of an excused absence versus unexcused absence, and some that are excused may count against in certain scenarios. And so appreciate that comment. It's a little consistent with what we've heard. Others who would like to chime in? Yes, ma'am, I see you. If you would, please state your name. Go ahead and get started when you're ready.
Sure. My name is Christy Carroll Highfield. One of the things that I'd really like to see, and I do agree with the other comments that have been made, that we need to be very careful and intentional in how we rate schools, because I feel like there's a real chance to misinterpret what's available in a school if we don't select our criteria very carefully. One of the things that I'd like to see as a parent are what opportunities are available in the school, and have that weighted very heavily, especially as we move into middle school now, with CTE programming becoming available in middle schools and career pathways starting that early, showing some representation for the opportunities for our students to begin to become career ready in an early level, and let that be reflected in the grade, just the opportunities that are there.
Thank you very much. Short and sweet. I appreciate that. Opportunities in the school as well as CTE in middle school are two things that I heard pulled out of your comments there. And kind of the idea of CTE in middle school is something that's come up a few other times as well. In terms of opportunities in a schoolhouse community, that's something we've heard resoundingly clearly, I think, over the course of this, and not necessarily in terms of whether it should be included for sure in the calculation. That I think has been some recommendations that we've heard, but I think we have heard clearly that regardless of if it is included in a calculation, please publish alongside that letter grade some of these kind of additional components that paint a fuller picture of the entire kind of school experience, you know, in terms of extracurriculars and other things like that as well. So I appreciate the comments that you made there. Others who would like to chime in? Yes, ma'am. I see you up here. We're going to bring you a microphone. If you would, please say your name and go ahead and get started when you're ready.
Okay, I'm Edna Varner. Sorry I'm late. I was at East Brainerd Elementary, spent a little time with Ms. Hamill before we realized I did not have a child in her room, but I'm directionally challenged, so happy to be here. So this would be helpful. Tell us what you think this grading system is going to tell us that we don't already know. And then 5-10 years from now, what are you hoping it will tell us about how we have all held ourselves accountable for making sure that the schools that have the lowest grades no longer have the lowest grades?
Thank you very much. I'll answer that. I think when you look at the legislation, it requires those few little bullet points that I mentioned in terms of achievement, growth, and then other indicators to be determined, right? We've talked about it in the past. We're talking about it now. We will implement this fall. When we think about what is this intended to do, it's really intended to be a parent-friendly or public-friendly type of communication tool, rating system that explains the school's impact, the school's experience over the previous academic year. Kind of to the point about then what comes next after we, kind of implement this legislation and school letter grades are published later this fall. This legislation does not require or provide extra resources, for example, in the same way that a federal accountability system may. It doesn't require additional steps for planning or kind of student outcome goal setting in and of itself. That's something I think, and I see the commissioner in the back of the room, that's something we've talked a lot about as we've been kind of really looking deeply at implementation, doing it in as fair as a way as possible that is achieving kind of that public-friendly communications tool and a rating system that is meaningfully different. But also, what are we going to do as a department to show up and support district schools, parents, teachers, anyone who kind of wants to come around, embrace their school community, whether it's successful and we want to move it to the next level, or if we've got a lot of work to do. And so those have been some of the conversations we've held internally, but the legislation doesn't in and of itself kind of call for or trigger extra steps or extra supports.
So the district, so the labeling is to help the districts identify something they haven't already identified?
The question was, is
I'm
the
trying to
labeling and
understand,
yes, ma'am.
what are we going to know with the grades that we don't already know?
Yes, ma'am. I see the commissioner coming around. I think we might have to share microphones there, but Commissioner Reynolds.
Okay, so couple of things. So A through F is just a rating system, right? It's like in the past. Okay, just hold on. There is no, this bill passed in 2016, okay? It was intended to have a very clear label or rating on what, you know, that campus is doing, right? You see other states that will have, oh, I wish I can't ever remember the Utah one, but like a C, the equal to a C in Utah is typical. So if you think about it, if a parent sees, oh, my school is typical, but it's a C, that's a little confusing. What does that mean? What does typical mean? So the idea of A, B, C, D, F is that most parents went through school and they understand what A means, what B, right? A is exceptional excellence, B is good, maybe a little bit more further to go, but for the most part, doing a upstanding job. C is, well, you know, where are we suffering, right? Is it subgroups? And we talked a little bit about sub-pops, about whether it's an English language learner, whether it's one of the minority groups, whether it's a poverty group, right, and a significant poverty, to really identify, is the campus doing the job that it has been charged by the taxpayer to educate those students? So that's the reason for the actual rating system. But what we're also talking about is accountability, and I think somebody else raised that question as well. I think you also raised the question. We're talking about, okay, are we doing, is this campus doing the job that it's supposed to be doing with the kids? It is also part of information for the district to be able to identify where the needs are. So to be able to understand, okay, if this campus, I've got this campus that's an A, okay, what are they doing that's really great? Okay, and what are the demographics, right? So, because you also want our superintendents to be able to understand the demographics, campus by campus, right? So, here's what an A, it's got high incidence of poverty, but they are knocking it out of the park. So what are we doing so well here, right? And then you go and you have a C, same demographics, but not doing quite well. So what kind of decisions does the district need to make in order to continue to improve on that campus? So it is it's a twofold system per se. And you asked the question, why don't we do what the old system did? Well, as Chelsea said earlier, when the numbers were run, when the models were run last year, because the intent was to implement the A through F system last year, they found that there was a lot of maybe half-truths that were coming out in the modeling. So you would say that a district that grew a lot, but maybe have 15% of all their students on that campus reading on grade level came out as a B. And then you had another campus where the proficiency rate was 80% or 90%. That campus is a B. So if you think about those two campuses that were called Bs, is having a campus that has only 15% reading proficiency really a B school? If those kids cannot read. So what we're trying to ask, right, what we're trying to find out is, what are those characteristics that you would like to see that actually help determine in a valid, reliable, and comparable way, right? Because we have to be able to match data across every, reading and math and any other indicators, achievement and growth, depending on how we weight those, when we bring the stakeholder groups together after the town halls, to really determine, okay, so what does it look like to have, and that's what these other indicators are for, and that's what we're asking. What other indicators in say, an elementary school would you like to see that also contribute to whatever level that, whatever that rating is? But in that same vein, we also want to tell the full story, right? Which gets to a lot of what you were saying over here. So how do we, kind of think about your big A calculation, right? That's the state calculation. That's going to determine campus by campus, A, B, C, D, F. But what we've also been talking about is how do we also kind of have this kind of little a narrative so that we can also talk about in middle school, this campus offers students these early entree career pathways that they've used their innovative school model money to think about what those CTE pathways they have in their high schools that actually feed into regional needs, but they're bringing it back into the middle school. So how do we tell that story better? How do we give schools and districts that opportunity to tell the full story of all the good work that's happening on that campus? But you don't want to create a one-size-fits-all at the state level, right? So say you can say, well, at my middle school, I've got 80% of students that are satisfied with their education. They find it rigorous, they find it challenging, and their parents like it too. Like, we're talking school climate, but they feel safe. They feel good. They love the interaction with their teachers. Those are the stories that can also be told in this kind of little a manner that can also elevate to parents. These are the other kinds of things that we do at our campus. So we're a little bit trying to do both. The legislation does not require us to do little a, right? Or what I call little a. It's just a term I use. It probably means nothing. But what we've been charged to do is, through achievement, growth towards achievement, and any other indicators, build a rating system. The other thing that I also want to emphasize is this is not a one and done, right? We're going to learn a lot we're going to have these town halls and we're going to have stakeholder meetings. There'll be superintendents, there'll be teachers, there'll be parents, to really kind of start putting pen to paper and start thinking about, based upon all these conversations, what should the calculation look like? Should achievement be 50% and growth 40% and other indicators 10%? Did I get that right? And then make that calculation and try again to be able to communicate in a very clear way what this really means. And we should celebrate growth 100%. We should also celebrate achievement, because at the end of the day, we can grow and kids can grow, but if they never get on grade level, they don't have much of a future, particularly when it comes to reading and math. And so it's really about us trying to figure out where schools are, and then then what? What kind of conversations can we have to really think about, okay, so you have a D campus, and I think there are also some hearing triggers at the state board, right, Chelsea? But say you have a D campus, you lose your appeal, but you also want to be able to tell a story. We've had this influx of kids. They started out here, they've grown. We believe they are going to meet that mark next year. How do we tell that full story appropriately? So that's what this is about. But at the end of the day, in a really, simple way, we're just trying to figure out how schools are doing to grow kids, to help kids read and do math on grade level. Now, other people we've heard in some other, at some other town halls, we should include social studies and science, the results of those tests. Is that something y'all would like to consider? What other comparable, valid, reliable measures can we use, but at these different levels? Like what's unique to high school? Post-secondary outcomes, right? How many kids get accepted to the TCAT and then they complete? Or higher education or post-secondary, whatever that post-secondary is. Particularly around here where you'll have these tremendous partnerships with higher education that are actually putting kids on these paths, ready to work, or ready to go on to college or wherever they choose to go. So how do we capture that with respect to this rating system? In a valid, reliable way, so that would be actual outcomes, or in telling the story of the school district and the way that it partners with higher education and other community partners to really provide that world experience for kids. It also could just be having really fantastic after-school programming for kids. It could be talking about how a district has invested itself in creating a collaborative process of pre-K, right? Where they've combined resources, the district or that campus and Head Start and maybe a child care provider, to really kind of bring resources together to really create more opportunities for students to attend preschool. So there's so many different ways to kind of think about this. And so yes, is it scary to have the unknown? It absolutely is. Is the timeline the best timeline it could be? I mean, it is what it is, right? We've got to get this done by November, and that's why we're here.
You need to make one more comment.
Yes, ma'am.
I know this is already passed. I know you're new. Everything you said is a wonderful way for us to approach what we are aspiring to, and that's making sure all of our kids get the great education they need. So, and we already know how schools are doing. So we want to go back to a grading, and we're stuck with it. We want to go back to a grading system during a time when all students were not served equitably, to a grading system that many of us don't have fond memories of, although I do, because I made the A's, whether I understood or not. Good memory. What will happen is, and we know it, once these come out, there will be such disappointment and hemorrhaging and wailing and gnashing of teeth, if that's, I forgot it. So first we deal with all of that. Then we get to the wonderful aspirations you've described. We already know it's going to happen, yet we're going to do it anyway. And however long it takes us to get over the devastation of this, we will get over it eventually, and then we'll get around to everything you want us to do. So those will be my last comments.
Thank you very much. I see a couple other hands. Director Robinson, I saw yours, then we're going to go back to you, ma'am.
So,
go ahead.
Chelsea, I think it's really important to think about when this legislation was written. It was written in 2016 when things were significantly different than they are now. I'll point to one significant difference, just the state's report cards of school districts and individual schools. You can go through and a person in the public can break down, can compare schools. So everything the legislation is saying this is meant to do, we now have the ability to do it where we didn't in 2016, right? And that's, you guys have done that. You've done a great job of making sure the public can drill down on reports, can compare schools, compare districts, compare like schools, compare like districts. So essentially, what we're trying to achieve with this legislation in 2016, which we did not have, we now have, right? Also want to point out another thing. You left out 2019 on the slide in terms of why we didn't have grades then. So I'm curious as to why we didn't have it's 18.
Yeah, I think there was a number of years where our testing administration
No,
was
it
not
wasn't
as great, but
it wasn't 19.
I'll have to double check.
It was 16 and 18.
Okay.
19, there was nothing wrong with the testing, and we decided not to do grades. So I say that again because and I should have said this to start. You guys are coming into this. Thanks for coming and speaking to us and being open to this. But in 2019, there were no issues, and we didn't issue grades. So there is a way out of not having to feel rushed into doing this by November. The third thing, and I think you were saying in your rung analogy, kind of similar to what the commissioner was saying about the importance of achievement, right? That a school at 20% and a school at 80% being judged a B kind of causes confusion. Is that kind of what you were saying with the rungs?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Like if a rating system, any rating system, not A
So-
through F.
So, Hamilton County, we've got 73 schools. We've got schools that serve kids that are dealing with all kinds of barriers, and we have some schools that, quite honestly, serve kids that have very few barriers. And so, looking at achievement and trying to compare whether a school is serving kids well or not, I just don't feel like that is an accurate way of doing it. In 2016, when this was first rolled out, there were two options with achievement. There was absolute achievement, and then there was schools hitting their AMOs, right? And there was a best of, meaning if 80%, if that's your best, and you didn't hit your AMO, or if you're at 15%, but you got to 18% and you hit your AMO, then that would be considered an A, right? And so I think if we're going to include achievement, having some caveat there to not just look at absolute achievement, but also look at an indicator the states put out. AMOs are something that, are reliable. I don't know, reliable may not be the right word, but you know what I mean. They're a metric that's recognized by the state that provides, in my opinion, a little bit of nuance to achievement outside of just saying absolute 80%. So I would encourage, if we're looking at achievement being a large percentage of a letter grade, that there should be some nuance around AMOs and best of.
Thank you very much. We're going to go, yes, ma'am, you in the blue. If you wouldn't mind to say your name again,
Sure.
and then we'll come to you with blue dress, please.
Yep. It's Shannon Moody.
Thank you. Go ahead and get started when you're ready.
I just wanted to put a point on, I think when I paused on your rung statement, that's what I was honestly afraid you were saying, and I think it just got confirmed. As I'm speaking in my parent hat now and nothing else, I'm a parent of a third grader in our school system. I want to know, what I want to know with a letter grade is how is the school serving kids? I don't want to know if it's a high income school. I know that already. If we use achievement alone, or in the example you gave where 80% versus 15%, all that is telling me is it's a high income school, most likely, right? What I want to know is, regardless of the school that we're doing, right? Like, is the school moving their kids forward in both growth and kind of crossing that finish line in achievement? And I want to know if that 80% school has dropped 10%, right? That's important because that's telling me the instruction that's going on in the school, not just what the demographic of the school is. So I wanted to be just like crystal clear on that point, that as a parent, it is not helpful for me to have a grade that is simply on how the overall proficiency of a school. I don't want to know that.
So I just have to, I get frustrated when I hear that there's some confusion about whether or not growth is going to be part of the calculation. Growth is going to be be part of the calculation. And if a so-called high-income campus is knocking it out of the park with their high-income kids, we're going to be able to tell, are they doing just as good a job with their low-income kids or their kids of color or XYZ? And if they're not, that will also come out in the calculation. So I've been perplexed with some of these conversations about how only the high-income schools are going to get the A's, and that is just not the case. That is not the intent of the system. It is about being able to understand, is that campus doing the job that it is supposed to do in order to help students read, write, and do math on grade level, so that once they surpass that third grade critical juncture in reading, they are prepared to learn, to be able to learn. And that is what the goal is. It is not about pointing fingers. It's not about letting any sort of demographic off the hook. It is about being knowledgeable about what's going on that campus and whether or not the job is being done to educate those students. That includes growth, absolutely. But you cannot base a system, tell parents in the face that their school's doing really well and their kids cannot read. And I have seen instances I have a letter that was sent to me of a parent who was pleading for their child to be promoted to 4th grade. This was a school district that did not retain a lot of kids. So for the most part, this was a very small number of kids that had been retained. And then they included their report card that had A's and B's. This kid failed the TCAP badly. But the school is telling this parent, this child is an A in English. We need to get to the truth. And there's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing, because you're doing a great job. Everybody is doing a great job. That is the assumption that we're coming into this calculation with.
All right.
I feel like I'm debating. I shouldn't be. I'm debating.
We're your first trip to Hamilton County, and we're already debating. It's not a.
Go ahead, Director Robinson.
So I think the frustration that you feel and the frustration that we feel is because this law has been in effect for 7 years, right? And in the times when we could have done it, the model turned out too many A schools, and so we didn't run it. That's what happened in 2019. That was a rhetorical question that I was asking, but that's why districts, especially districts like Hamilton County, that over 50% of our kids are kids of color. We have a high number of kids that are living in poverty. And so when you're talking about large districts like ours, and we don't have the nuance that is said quite yet. Now, if it's in there, I mean, honestly, if we can put something in this where there's a best of AMO versus, right. Well, that's what, in 2016, that's what it came out to. Sure. Yeah, but what, in 2016, take K through 8, for example, was 45% achievement, right? But you had the option of best of AMO or best of absolute achievement. And that's what I'm saying. Because again, if you're setting the target saying a 70% or above is an A school, below 20% is an F school, well, if a school went from 5 to 15% and a school went from 80 to 71%, I would say 10% growth in achievement, even though it's only 15%, that's more of an A school than the school that went from 80 to 71. There's just so much nuance to this that, and again, for 7 years, we've been talking about this, and the 2 years that I would argue actually we could have run it last year, for example, and in 2019, what came out is that there are too many schools that got A's that we think shouldn't have an A. And that's frustrating to districts.
That's not the premise that we're
I have nothing to right? I mean, literally said hi to you 10 minutes ago. So we're going to have to build, right, some of that. And I get this all the time. I'm 18 months into this position, and people say, we don't trust the district. I'm like, why do you not trust me, right? And it's different. The state is different than your position. The second thing that I will point out, now you're watching my time, 2016, when this law was written, there was not a voucher program in the state of Tennessee. Now there is. We're talking a lot, like I've heard several times, people mentioning taxpayer dollars. What I think needs to be considered in 2023 is that as taxpayers, we deserve also to know how private schools that are accepting public dollars are performing with our kids. So again, a lot changed from 7 years. That's a consideration.
Thank you very much. If you wouldn't mind state your name, please. Go ahead and get started when you're ready.
Sonia Stewart. I think one of the things that you've contended is that the way that the original accountability system was designed is flawed. Like you've said that it wasn't generating, it was generating misinformation. It wasn't giving. So I think I would contend that that's not true. And I think I would also contend that our job as educators is to convey a robust and holistic impression of a school and a school district. And so to your 15 and 80%, analysis here, my curiosity is,
Where did 15, 80%?
you said,
I said 45%.
no, I'm sorry, it was your example of your proficiency, a school that had 80% proficiency and a school that had 15%. Yes. So I think that it's an interesting thing for the state to contend that let's say an 80% school has a TVAS of 1 and a 15% school has a TVAS of 5. Which school is doing better by the public, for the parent?
We have not determined the calculation.
No, I'm asking because you're talking about telling stories of schools and school systems. Which story for a parent is a better story? We have a school that's scoring 80% proficiency, but it's a level 1, which means that our kids are not keeping up with their like peers in the state, versus a school that has 15% proficiency and a level 5, meaning our kids are exceeding the pace of their like peers in the state. Which story tells us more about the learning that's happening in that school? So,
It's going to be a vote. Again, I don't know because we have not determined the calculation. We are using these town halls to get input, which we're receiving greatly today, and then we will have our committees come together, which y'all will be a part of. There will be school people in these committees where we will deliberate and come up with a calculation to determine A through F. I don't know what that is right now. I can't tell you what.
okay.
I can't tell you. I can tell you that at the end of the day, parents want their kids to be on grade level to be able to read and do that.
And I think when we talk about growth, what we're telling parents is your kid is moving faster and faster towards grade level. We're doing everything we can to get him or her there. Okay, so the other thing that I hear that, the other thing I think I would put out there is, has there been any consideration for the ability of a school to move their children who are not proficient to proficient? Because we know that some kids enter school at grade level and they leave at grade level. There's no school effect there, potentially. But what about the kids that come into school below grade level? Could we consider a metric that what we're really looking at is the distance? Is the distance?
Yeah, keep going with that. A metric that would what? I'm writing your comment down.
Right. That we're holding schools accountable for kids that are below grade level getting to grade level, right? Because we can be at a school that has 70% proficiency all the time, but that 30%, we're not holding the school accountable. So if they're at grade level when they get here and they stay at grade level, good job, school, you're doing what you're supposed to do. But if you're below grade level and you get to grade level, now you're actually, there's some deep learning that's going on.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
I think that's a different conversation.
Yes, ma'am, that's helpful. And I will say one of the things that we've heard at some of the other public town halls is we've heard input from folks is actually kind of a historical view. Should we look just at last year Should we look at a handful of years or 3 years and actually look at trends in growth, trends in achievement, trends in some other indicator? If they're consecutive, that's helpful input. Right. I hear what you're saying, and I'll make sure that we're writing that down, Director. But yeah, that's something that we've heard at other town halls is, okay, if we're thinking about, again, that achievement measure that must be included, that growth measure that must be included, do we have to limit ourselves to last year's growth, last year's achievement, or could we look at a longer period of time and look at trend information? So that's super helpful. I thought I saw someone over here with a hand up a few moments ago. I want to make sure that if you all would like to participate in the discussion and provide some comment, that you have that opportunity. Yes, ma'am, I see you. We're going to bring you the microphone. If you would please say your name again for us and get started when you're ready.
My name is Christy Carol Highfill. One of the things that I want to make sure that we're doing, and it's not a specific achievement per se, but as I work with parents every day. That's what I do. I work with parent groups. I talk to parents every day. I go over a lot of the things you're doing in the state with parents every day. And we're saying a lot of things that I can tell you right now, none of the parents that I know are going to understand, right? They're not going to understand what we're talking about at all. So when you roll this out, there's so much subjectivity too, just in the ABCD. I can tell you right now that if one of my children brought me home a C, we would have a very different conversation than if another child brought home a C, right? Because I have to look at that according to the child. So I think different parents in different households are even going to look at those letters very differently. And then, what they do with that information, if we're talking about public tax dollars and decisions being made, that's a whole other concern, right? Because I want everybody on the same level playing field. Something that was said is, private schools having the same letter grading system, and I think that's appropriate. But I want to make sure that we're explaining these very clearly so that every parent understands what's really included in there in a way that they can digest appropriately. I mean, a lot of parents are not even going to understand the difference between growth and achievement, because isn't growth an achievement, right? So when we're talking about these things, it has to be presented in a way that they can understand, that they can consume as a level playing field, because if not, then it serves no real purpose.
Thank you very much for your comment. Appreciate that. Others who wanted to chime in? I could have sworn I saw another hand. Feel free to raise your hand if you've got something else you'd like to say and contribute tonight. We'll bring you a microphone. As we think about those components and the requirements in the legislation for achievement and growth, some of those other indicators, I'm interested if there are folks who have some thoughts about those. We've heard a little bit about it tonight, but want to raise that question again. And I think the other component we'd love to hear about is kind of elementary school, middle school, high school specific information that would be helpful. I also recognize we've been here for about an hour. My team is going to continue to stick around until the end of the town hall, but I also don't want to hold us too long here if folks have not, if folks have exhausted their comments. So if you've got another piece that you'd like to contribute, please go ahead and raise your hand. Yes, sir. Timeline. Question on timeline. So I mentioned that the state report card, that website you were referencing, sir, is where this information will be housed. That typically comes out late fall every year. We're planning for November of this year, and so that's the first time you will see letter grades implemented in alignment with that law that was passed a number of years ago. Before folks jump up, I want to make sure to put this slide up for you all and really encourage you to email us as often as you would like on any of the topics that we've talked about this evening. We are going to continue to solicit public comment through September 15th. That time is getting closer and closer. It feels like at the beginning of this tour it was a long way off. But it is a couple short weeks away. So please be sure, if you would like to continue to engage, iterate, provide new ideas, new input, email us anytime at schoollettergrades@tn.edu. All right, I will go ahead and adjourn us for those who are in the room. As I mentioned, we're going to hang around for a little bit longer in case anyone else would like to show up, but appreciate you spending some time with us this afternoon. Thanks very much.